Our first reading today comes from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 17, verses 5 through 8. This is what the Lord says. Cursed is the one who trusts in humankind, who draws strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. That person will be like a bush in the wastelands. They will not see prosperity when it comes. They will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. And from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 13 through 20. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." May God bless the hearing and the living of this word. And further from the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, from Secrets of Heaven, number 9207. The fact that truths perish with those who have no desire for good is evident from what has been stated regarding goodness and truth when joined together. But something further must be stated regarding that joining together. Truths that have been joined to good always hold within them a desire to do good, and at the same time to be joined more closely to good by doing it. Or what amounts to the same thing, those who possess truths always have a desire to do good and to join thereby to their truths. People, therefore, who think that they are in possession of truths but have no desire to do good do not in fact possess truths. That is, they have no belief in them, however much they imagine that they do have. Their condition is portrayed by the Lord when he speaks of salt in Matthew chapter 5. By the salt of the earth, he means the church's truth that has a desire for good. And by tasteless salt, he means truth devoid of any desire for good. The fact that such truth is worthless is portrayed by the idea of salt, which has become tasteless and no longer has any use. So, my friends, I remember when I was a child growing up in rural Australia, being involved in a number of tree planting initiatives. It seemed that at that point in time, deforestation had led to increased salt levels in the soil, which had decreased the soil's fertility. And the solution was to plant more trees. And my beloved choir teacher had even written a song about it, which still makes me so happy to remember to this day. And the words went like this: "We can hold the salt, we can help heal the land, we can plant trees with our own two hands. We can bring back the balance a little each year till the soil is sweet again and all the rivers run clear." It was branded onto my childlike heart the wonder that I, as small as I was, could do something beneficial and important to bring about a common good, and that we could all do it together. I will never, ever forget that. And so in that particular context, too much salt in the earth was a bad thing. When Jesus called his followers the salt of the earth, he was trying to get at something else entirely. Salt is certainly ubiquitous in our lives, and Jesus enjoyed using metaphorical language that employed the everyday. We have come to understand the salt of the earth to mean noble, no-nonsense, grounded, hard-working people. And this is basically who Jesus was talking to in this text. He had just begun the Sermon on the Mount, had just blessed the poor in spirit and the meek and those who mourn, people who don't normally see themselves as blessed. And then he likened them to a valuable and useful mineral, something that anyone would be delighted to find and use, something of worth. But he also delivered a warning. Salt without the quality of saltiness is pointless. It might as well be a random rock. Being salt of the earth was not a designation that could be bestowed. It was a quality that needed to be lived, a way of being. Salt really isn't salt unless it's salty. Now, in the Swedenborgian worldview, salt corresponds to the affection of truth. Now, it's old-fashioned phrasing, to be sure, but basically, think of that feeling of relief and openness and gratitude and contentment in our minds when something just clicks into place and makes sense and we know it's true. That is a good feeling. We love that feeling. We usually want more of that feeling. And Swedenborg calls this desire for, this drive for wanting more of that feeling, the affection for truth. And the affection for truth simply means the love that we have for things that are true. And more broadly, the love that we have for the notion and the existence of truth itself. So going further then, Swedenborg tells us that the state of being salted or salty represents the desire truth has for goodness. Swedenborg is nothing if not consistent. He tells us over and over and over again that truth is not actually true unless it is also good, unless its inherent truthfulness springs from goodness. So, if salt corresponds to loving the truth, having the quality of saltiness corresponds to recognizing how goodness is the soul of truth, how truth is necessarily conjoined to goodness, and that loving what is true must also mean loving what is good. And because of this, because loving what is true also means loving what is good, that Swedenborg describes salt as representing the conjunctive power of the heavenly marriage, which is the union of love and wisdom in God. He says, salt receives this meaning from its conjunctive properties, for it makes ingredients all combine and consequently brings out their flavor. And this is one way to think about the so-called conjunctive power of salt. But I also cannot help to think of the chemical makeup of salt. Table salt is the result of the conjunction of two different elements, an atom each of sodium and chlorine. And these specific atoms of sodium and chlorine need each other because of an imbalance in their electrons. One has too many, and one has too few. They can join so that they can share an electron together. And the force of that sharing, a positive charge and a negative charge, creates a totally new thing, sodium chloride, or table salt. So even in its molecular form, salt models a principle of conjunction, the union of truth and goodness, for together, truth and goodness become something whole and useful. Truth alone is like an atom missing an electron, deeply, inherently, and desperately incomplete. It yearns for connection. And so, Truth cannot just refer to good or be adjacent to good, but genuine truth fervently wishes to be conjoined to good, to share its life, so that they together may be essentially one thing and one thing only, truth that does good. Now, the Sermon on the Mount is not the only time that salt is mentioned in the Bible. There is also plenty of wasteland imagery to be found that speaks to what happens when there is too much salt and nothing can grow. And this was the burgeoning reality of my rural homeland, which very good people worked hard to reverse. And so Swedenborg tells us that in the contrary sense, salt represents the perversion of the desire for truth, and consequently, the destructive desire that falsity has for evil. Because the reality is that the innate desire that we human beings have for knowing things can be turned inward. That shining, beautiful moment of having things make sense can be addictive. We want to feel that way all the time. We want to claim that we have all the answers, that complete certainty is the only good, and that doubt and questioning and nuance is a sign of weakness and moral relativism. But it is an illusion that truth can be grasped and captured and turned into an unshakable certainty that serves to placate our fear of being alone, of being replaced, of being unworthy, of being broken. When truth is used thus, it is emptied of itself. It becomes a shadow and a shell. No matter how logical or sensical it may sound on the outside, truth emptied of good is false. It is soulless, a black hole, a weapon. And this is love for self, for safety, for superiority, for power, dressed up as a love for truth. As Jesus suggests, it may look like salt, but it is no longer salty. It cannot season or preserve. It cannot increase enjoyment or productivity. It is just a sharp and spiky, hard rock. And while I take Jesus' point that such truth has lost its inherently useful quality, saltiness, speaking in this way, I think, actually downplays the dangerousness of a love for truth that is turned inward. The salt metaphor taken in another direction, the wasteland, as we heard in our Jeremiah reading, brings this home much more potently. Too much salt can lead to the ruination of the land, lay it waste, destroying it, preventing growth, fertility, generativity. And likewise, a grasping, rapacious desire for truth that keeps turning the truth inside out like so many empty pockets, searching ever more for something that will finally prove the superiority of our selfhood, that will finally ensure the justification of our transgressions, that will finally erase the need for vulnerability. This desire will destroy everything it comes across if given its way. This desire wants truth to serve and support power, but it cannot. Truth can only ever and will only ever serve love. We read in Jeremiah, "But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream." Just as I planted tree after tree in my childhood home, trying to halt the salt and heal the land and bring back the balance, so we too can strive to love truth in the right way, for the ways that truth grounds us and puts our hands in the dirt, makes us salt of the earth. We can strive to have an affection for truth that serves good. Not truth that serves party, not truth that serves power, not truth that serves self-preservation, but truth that serves good. For we are the trees that will hold the salt and heal the land and bring back the balance. Let us plant ourselves by the Lord's living water, truths that hydrate and flow right through our branches into leaves and fruit and flowers, a bounty of goodness for all. Amen.